Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Beitza, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishnah Zayin, Mishnah 7. A quick introduction. The malacha of grinding, tochen, grinding, is basically forbidden on Yontif. For example, it is forbidden to grind grain, meaning the typical, but the most common, let's call it, the way I understand it is, the more common form of grinding, which is to grind grain, can't do that on Yontif. Because even though on Yontif you can do malachas activities that are for food preparation, but foods that are typically done on a large scale, you cannot do them on Yontif. However, something like salt or spices that need to be ground, you could grind that on Yontif. That's a food that is ground in small amounts, and therefore on Yontif you could do it. So your more common grinding will be forbidden on Yontif. And there's certain types of grinding that's permissible on Yontif. Because of that, we now have a discussion of the Mishnah about what is the way that one needs to grind salt and spices, which are the things that we are allowed to grind. The question is that, again, since generally grinding is prohibited on Yontif, that now the way we grind, even things that we may grind, have to be done in an atypical manner, an unusual manner. Beis Shammai say, tavlin, spices, they are ground with a pestle of wood and not with a pestle of stone. Now, as they explain here, spices since spices are typically ground with a madoich, a pestle, it's a pounding tool, in a medocha, a mortar, which is the bowl. So Beis Shammai say like this. Since grinding is generally forbidden on Yontif, Beis Shammai rule that even when it is allowed in cases of spices, a change in procedure is necessary. It's called a shinui. Got to do it somewhat different. Instead of using the usual stone pestle, right, that's harder and stronger, one must use a wooden one. Okay? So now, although the way that you're grinding it regularly, however, what you use to grind it has to be not regular. Now, again, it's a pestle, which is the kind of utensil that you use for chopping, for grinding something down, like the spices. However, typically you do something stronger. And we say the tool has to be, Shammai say the tool has to be different. It has to be wooden. That's when we're talking about spices. Beis Shammai say spices are ground with a wooden pestle. Bahamelach, salt, you've got, clumps of salt, right? Or we're talking about clumps where the salt was already granulated and then it got stuck together. We're talking about it's been come out of the salt mine, right? And it still needs to be ground. It still needs to be ground up. The hamelach salt, the pach ube'etz haparer. You want to grind salt, clumps of salt. You have to use an earthenware flask or a wooden mixing spoon. And you can't use a pestle of any type. You typically do not grind your salt using a spoon, right? Trying to push down on a spoon or trying to bang it with a earthenware pitcher. That's clearly not the way. That's clearly not what what you're not going to use. But when it comes to salt, Beis Shammai say the shinoi, what you do different has to be significant. Not only by spices, it's enough. You can use a pestle. It has to be wooden. By the salt, you can't even use a pestle. You have to use something that's going to get the job done, but in a very unusual way to do it, like using some other kind of a utensil. What's the difference between salt and spices? How come the salt needs a greater shinui, a more significant change than the spices? And the answer is because spices, we say, if you grind your spices before Yontif, your spices are going to lose their flavor, lose their taste. And therefore, you're allowed to do it on Yontif. So since you're allowed to do it on Yontif, Beis Shammai still say, look, you can do it on Yontif, but you still have to make somewhat of a change, somewhat of a shinui. That's why you can only use a wooden pestle. When it comes to the salt you could have ground before Yontif. Could have done it before Yontif. Nothing happens to the salt when you grind it before Yontif. No difference between on Yontif or before Yontif. And anything that you can do before Yontif, you got to do it before. If you don't do it on Yontif, I'm sorry, if you didn't do it before Yontif, you're going to be allowed to do it on Yontif, but then you're going to need a significant change. And that that's what Shammai says, the salt on Yontif, which you could have done before Yontif, is going to need a greater, more significant change, which is you can't even use a pestle. Rabbi Hillel say, when it comes to grinding spices, you can do it regularly with a stone pestle. If you're allowed to do it on that day, when you say tavlin spices, you can grind on Yontif itself, because again, you can't do it before Yontif, it's going to lose its flavor. So so you can do it on Yontif. And once you can do it on Yontif, Beisil will say, I don't need any shinoi. I don't have to do it in any kind of unusual manner. But if we're talking about salt, which again, you could have done before Yontif and you didn't, but Madach Shalates, then you can use the wooden pestle. You don't have to go as far as not using a pestle, but it has to be not a regular pestle, the wooden pestle. So because the salt could have been done before Yontif and you did it on Yontif, therefore you have to use some kind of a shinu. You got to do it in some unusual manner, but it's enough just to not use your regular type of pestle, which would be the stone one. You can use a wooden one. So Beisil basically say the spices that you could have they're allowed to grind on Yontif. You can do it regularly with a wooden pestle. When it comes to the salt, which you could have done before Yontif, and now you're doing it on Yontif, the shinui, then you have to do a shinui, then you have to do it in an unusual manner. But again, it's enough just to go ahead and use a pestle of wood. You don't have to go ahead, and we don't say you cannot use a pestle at all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Salt.